Hello, all. I'm Daniel Coolbaugh, again, your host of the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. You can tell it's already been a long week for me. I have my guest here with me, Kelly McCullough. Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm not entirely a morning person, so if I'm a little slow on something, that's why.
That's fair. That's fair. It's been a very fall morning here in central New York, so I definitely understand that feeling. So it took me a while to wake up. Well, Kelly, like I was telling you before we started recording, myself and my friend are a huge fan of your Fallen Blades series. I remember one day, it was about 2 years ago, and my wife I was having a really rough day from work. I have a teacher, and it was right before the pandemic, and she was like, "Hey, let's just go to Barnes and Noble." And we were kind of out and about shopping. So I was like, fine. She's like, buying a book always makes you feel better. So I said, sure. So we go into one of the local Barnes and Nobles in Syracuse, and your first book is sitting right there. And I thought, you know what, that really looks like me. And the cover had me. I went, and as soon as I read the blurb on the back, I was like, yes, this is definitely my kind of read. And I was really slammed with grad school and different things. I was finishing up my second master's, and I probably finished it within 2.5 days, which is also really impressive because I was also coaching at the time too, and I was tutoring. So I mean, it was like, I think I maybe finished it in, maybe 11 hours with all of that being broken up. So after that, I went and grabbed the next 3 right off the bat and just went bam, bam, bam. And then once I was done with my master's, it probably took me about a month or two, to kind of get my brain free. But I ended up finishing all of them really within the first, I'd say 3 or 4 months of discovering the first book. So I was really excited, to talk to you on Twitter and things like that. And I was really excited that, you wanted to come and talk to us today, actually. I'm really curious to hear about your answer for this first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point? And I know that's a loaded question, but a lot of our viewers just want to know, because a lot of them are in the same, boats, and things like that, or the same harbors or docks. And it's nice to see that people are sailing away in a good spot. So
yeah, for me, it's been my career actually looks a lot like a career of somebody 20 years older, because I actually started out I wrote a novel. It's not very good. It's down in my basement in a shelf somewhere. It actually almost sold a couple of times, and I occasionally imagine what my career would be like if that had sold back in, that would have been 1990. Where my first book selling around 2005, and I think that it would have really stunted my growth as an author. There are so many things that I learned by failing that it helps. But so then I started writing short stories and selling them. And actually, my break-in was short stories to some of the classic paper magazines. So my first short story went to Weird Tales, the classic pulp magazine.
Oh, cool.
I did short stories for a while, and then one of those short stories I used as the anchor point for my first saleable novel, Webmage, and went looking for an agent and was able to get an agent because I had broken into the pulps. I mean, old school agent. And so it was that very much like if I had started writing in 1950, reach this to sort of the midpoint, 8 or 10 books in. But yeah, so that's it. It was not a smooth progression by any means. Like I said, I started writing. Well, let me take one step back. I come out of theater.
Cool.
I was a improv performer for many years, child actor. I started acting when I was 9 or 10. But when I was about 20, I met the woman who I eventually married, my now wife of 27, 28 years. And it was like this light went on over my head that said, you do realize that theater and having a relationship in a normal life are not the world's most compatible goals. And despite having been doing theater at that point for 12, 15 years, it was like this revelatory moment. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to take a step back from the theater. I'm going to not do my normal fall improv stuff. And I'm going to try and figure out whether I still want to do that or what. And so I sat down to write what was my first novel. And the reason I started writing was always loved science fiction, always loved fantasy. My mother used to read them to me before I could speak. So I'm like a third generation fan.
That's awesome.
And I sat down to write it, in part because I love the field, and in part because every teacher I've ever had was like, "You're a great writer. You should be writing more." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll try and write a book." And I fell in love with the process. I love everything about writing. I love sitting down to work. I love new worlds appearing in front of you. I love hitting that intractable problem where you're like, I don't know what happens next. How do I solve this problem? I love that moment when something you threw in like 6 chapters back just because you're like, oh, this would be a cool detail, turns out to be critical for a plot point. I just, the whole thing. So then I wrote that novel, didn't sell. Actually wrote a second novel, shifted over to short stories, was writing a third novel with the short stories, sold short stories. Wrote the fourth novel, Web Mage, which was my first novel that sold. And then was very much in production mode with Penguin Ace, and then Fywell and Friends Macmillan for my kids side. I'm currently in a lull because the Penguin Random House merger put the skids on that side of my career, and the third kids book didn't do so great. So I'm in the middle of looking for a new publisher and also looking for a new agent, which is always, not the world's most fun, but
Yeah.
took well, from starting writing in '89 to first short story sale was 10 years, and then 15 to the first book.
So that's one thing that I've had a large conversation with a good deal of like the indie writing community in particular. And one thing that we just want to do mention to people, because for instance, like Adrian Tchaikovsky has a very similar story to yourself. And he was like 13, 14 years in. I think he was like 12 books in, and he's like, if this last one doesn't sell, he's like, I'm going to go and do something else. But that ended up being Children of Men and doing really well. And then, spurring off, his next series, which has been great for him. But it's interesting for me, I feel like, to talk to different people who are just starting out, and, they're very frustrated. And I'm like, don't be frustrated. I said, if you think you're going to be an overnight success, you look at George R.R. Martin. He's another one of those guys, who was in it for a really long time,
His novel writing was just completely dead. His novel writing was just completely
he went off to do television writing almost exclusively.
Yeah.
And on the indie front, I have a couple of indie books myself now. That's one of the things that having the PRH merger kind of blow up that side of my career for a while made me think I want to be more in control. I want to get back to a place where I've got my new agent and my agent and I get along great. He's just 900 years old and retiring. But I want to get back to that side of things, but I don't want to be back in the place where I was writing 2 commercial books a year for a large press. What I'd like to do is write 1 large press book a year or every other year, and then also be doing the indie stuff where I have a little bit more control, because that's been really nice. There are parts about the publishers that I'm not thrilled with, but I can outsource most of those. But I really like being in control of the pace. And my Patreon is one of the things where I run stuff through there, and that's been great. And it's been really motivating to keep me writing, even in those windows where I was like, my career is over.
The lulls, as Michael R. Fletcher calls them, the lulls. Well, it's like I was just talking to Dirk Ashton about that, that type of method, where I call it the Brandon Sanderson method, because he gets those traditional contracts, but he's been really doing well with Skyward and a couple of those other ones. His the Librarian series, the young adult, like those are his indie, and I think the future of publishing, in my opinion, is going to go to hybrid, because like you said, you guys are, writing these books for trade publishing, but at the same time, and it's, especially now with the pandemic, it's a lot slower than it used to be, which is saying something. So yeah. I think,
I have a small press partner that does the hard
cool.
copy for my indie books, and what he was saying for him is that with the pandemic, with everybody doing their book shopping online, his business essentially jumped because readers don't care. Readers don't care if it's Penguin. They don't care if it's Wilder. They don't care who. They don't care. What they care about is getting the books by the authors they want. And the transformation in the industry since I started. Like I said, I have that old classic pulp's career start. And when I was starting, we didn't have indie press. We had Vanity Press, which was a terrible career killing idea. And watching the transformation has been surreal and very, very cool. Give so much more control to the writer.
Yeah. I think Paul S. Kemp a lot personally, because I had talked to him years ago. I think it was probably almost 10 years ago. That's when Forgotten Realms was still actually putting out books other than the big three. And I had somebody approach me about a novel I was writing, and it was total crap. So I'm glad I didn't publish it. But I thought that they were an actual company, and I sent them, the link and everything and the name and the agent's name or whatever to Paul S. Kemp. And he sent me a message back on Facebook. He said, Dan, this is a Vanity Press and you don't want anything to do with it. He's like, if you don't want to go traditional, he's like, you might want to look into indie. And that was the first time that I had ever even heard the word, indie publishing. And, now years later, I'm really glad I didn't do it again, because this book has changed so much. And I think it'd actually be one that people would like to read in the future versus, getting taken advantage of. And I thank, him a lot for, just answering a random Facebook message from a young kid, because he saved me, thousands of dollars and, a very, very hard experience in the publishing world. So yeah, it's interesting to see where, those, and I've had people approach me too who still are like that. But because of Paul, I'm like, no, I'm okay. Thank you though. Or I'll get back to you later, that kind of thing. But really in my head, I'm like, nah, you're just, trying to circle and get what you can. So those people are still out there. But yeah, I think if you find a good community and, find people that back you and, you can, get good resources or, ask people just questions. I think everybody's been awesome. I mean, I've had a couple of times I've asked you questions or different things, we've had great conversations on Twitter. And I think that to me is one thing that Dirk and I talked about a couple of weeks ago. I went down and met like Kevin Hearn, Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, Brian Stevely, Brian McCullough, just like so many people all at the same time at the same event, the Poison Pen, about 8 years ago. And I just thought that their community itself was really cool. I feel like it's only gotten better as time's gone on.
The science fiction and fantasy writers community has been very welcoming. I have tried to pay forward all the welcome I got. So with my very first couple of publications, Kristen Catherine Rush and Dean Wesley Smith took me under their arm, and they were like, part of the reason I was, not completely flipped out with the PRH merger is they're like, okay, so you're starting out. Here are the things you need to know. One of them is at some point your career is going to start on fire and sink. And that's okay. It happens to all of us. Here are the things you need to do to plan for that. Here's how you with it. That was fairly late in, when they were mentoring me. They don't start you off there because they don't want you to go and run for the hills. But they walked me through all of that years before it became a problem. So yeah, they were really helpful. So the thing you mentioned, that first book that you transformed. I know you're interested in the Fallen Blade series.
Oh yeah.
In particular. So the first version of what became the Assassin, the Fallen Blade, was a book called Assassin's Apprentice. And it was part of a trilogy that I called the Assassin Mage trilogy. It was very so the magic system started out because I was interested. Well, honestly, it started out in part because I'd been reading Mercedes Lackey's Herald Mage books.
Oh yeah.
And the way that the companions worked with the characters was, I'm like, well, that's interesting, but what's the mechanism? So I started thinking about the idea of familiars, both in classical magic and in fantasy and science fiction. And I'm like, I want to do something where the familiar is integral to the process and integral to the character, and they're inseparable. I wanted to do something with that. So that was that piece of magic system is where I started. The Blade magic system is where I started with the Blade. The third novel that I wrote was, like I said, it's not great, but it's not horrible. It was this Assassin's Apprentice. It was going to be the first of three. Was not picking up agents, so I ended up parking it when I went to write short stories. Then the thing that did sell was my Webmage series, which is, for your watchers, is hacking as magic. So magic is all done through spells. Webmage, spell crash. Anyway, the lead character is the grandson of one of the Greek fates and a hacker, because the fates have they now govern their system with a magical system, because it's much more efficient than the loom of fate. But when that was coming to a close, I was getting kind of burned out on it. So I proposed to my editor, I'm like, I want to do something completely different. We went talking back and forth, and the way we discussed it was, okay, I'm interested in writing anything. I like science fiction, I like fantasy, I write humor, I write quite dark. So I basically came up with this panel of sliders, like science fiction to fantasy, light to dark, and where do you want all of this? And then once we had a place, kind of what kind of series she wanted from me, I said, okay, now let me go away. I'll come back to you in like 2 or 3 weeks once I've had some time to think about it. And what we wanted was something episodic, so not like a trilogy, but an open-ended series. One of the models we talked about was now I've lost the name. Anyway, I'll come back to that. But the detective story for magic. I said, okay, I have this story in a box. This thing about familiars in a box, and I have the classic fantasy map, because you're 20, you're like, I want to write the classic fantasy trilogy. And I pulled that stuff out, and I said, well, there's a lot here that I still love. I still love the ideas for. Can I repurpose the world and the familiar stuff into something new and make that the world that I'm talking about with my editor? And what came out of that is like, okay, episodic. So I want to do something like a hard-boiled detective, because you get a mystery, it moves forward. Because of the way I think in terms of fantasy, it's got this huge arc, 9-book arc that I have now. 6 completed, 2.5 left to go. But each book was designed to I wanted you to be able to pick it up, read it, and go, oh, this is a cool book, and it has a complete story. So the detective, the episodic, the magic, and because so much of my thinking about how story works had changed in the 18 years between writing the books, I was able to do a lot of other stuff. So initially, the Blade books had a fairly standard fantasy world going on. I like to believe that if I had continued writing them, I would have changed things a little more like I did when I came back to them. One of the things that I've always tried to do when I'm world building is I will look at this thing fills this niche in the story, and this is the way my brain came up with the idea. So like the Durkoth, my underground fae, in the initial, okay, I need something that does this, they were basically dwarves, which was fine for conception. But then once I sat down to write about them, I'm like, okay, but everybody does dwarves. What can I do to make them cool? What can I do to make them all my own? And one of the threads that I always think about in terms of fantasy is fairy and classical fairy, not like too much of commercial fairy, where
the
fae are really fucking scary.
Yeah.
In the classical stories. So I'm like, okay, so I need something subterranean. I want it to be fairy-like. I want it to be really, really scary. And that's how my 4-foot dwarves with their braided beards and their axes became basically stop motion vampire elves.
I mean, they definitely were terrifying because you never know, like in the book, like when they're gonna pop up. And I feel like Arl in particular, remember there's like one scene where he's talking to someone and he's like has a thought, like they could come here at any minute, and it's like, yeah, they really can. And I just felt like it added a lot to I was just reading Philip Athens, his book on how to create really good monsters, and just character effects like that. And I just felt like that was one that really stuck with me from your series, because again, I felt like they could show up at any minute and you didn't know if what they were gonna do or where they would be. And it was just one of those things, but it was really good.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's one of the things that I bring to fantasy that I actually picked up. I think it might have been Werner Benji talking about science fiction, was if you want to create believable other species, there are two things you can do. One of them is to change the way they look. So something that doesn't look like a human, that's automatically one step of remove. But another thing you can do that is often scarier is it looks human, but it really, really doesn't think human. And I find that to be a much more interesting challenge, because it forces me to say, okay, I'm now a creature that lives for essentially ever, or until something kills it. How does that change the way I think about everything? And that's part of it. And I also the different environment, and how does that environment change the way I think about things? And I find that to be both a really fun writing challenge and a really useful tool for world building and fantasy. So that's one of my big world building tools. Another one is, one of them is, does this, so I always have a default that will pop in with when I'm writing a character. And one of those things is, I'm a middle-aged straight white guy. And so the first version of a character that will often pop in is very much, it's a me placeholder, because I'm doing, dialogue is between myself is a lot of the job. And so in a very mechanical, thinking it through way, some point after that placeholder character appears, I stop and I say, what are all the ways that I can make this character not like me? What are the things? Clearly, there are some things that I will retain, because it wouldn't have popped in to be a me-like character if I didn't need one. But everything that I can change away from that, everything that I can make more alien or just fundamentally different from where I started, is an opportunity to make the character and the interactions more interesting.
I really feel like you really hit the nail on the head there, though, with just like the shadow companions, just in general, like Triss, because there's so many times where you very subtly, like there's one circumstance, I don't want to do spoilers, but there's one circumstance where your main character Arl is, being attacked, right? And it's a not good situation, and his shadow companion Triss literally just goes ape and just like goes crazy on everybody, and then afterwards like apologizes to the main character, and then the main character is like, thinks about it, it's like, well, he's not, like, even he thinks of Triss as like a person, but he's not, right? He's from the realm of shadow. And I just thought that in particular, that really showed world building at its finest, because that showed that they are alien. They're alien to the world you created, to Arl's world. And it really made you wonder, like, there were other things that I don't want to give things away, but there's other things that you did where, with those types of shadow companions, where, it really did remind you that they're not human. They might talk, or, they might have the same emotions and things, but they are from the realm of shadow. And I just felt like personally deepened that character and all the shadow companions, and it really led credence to like the goddess Namara that you created. And I just think it led to a greater mythology, for me at least, of the world you created. And it actually also too, I feel like, really added to the other types of companions you had, like the stone dogs and things like that. And it even added, I think, a little bit more alienness to some of the, I don't want to spoil anything, so some of the other creatures that you had pop up in your world. I just think, but that was like, it was, Triss is a main character to me, and for him to act a certain way based off of his species, I guess you could say, or race, that really to me just lent a lot more to the entire world. After that, I looked at the book and the world building completely different just from that one circumstance.
Well, one of the things that I'm doing with the Blade series is I want Errol's very much a thinking character. He's always thinking. And having had his goddess murdered, not a big spoiler, it comes out in like early in chapter 1.
It's in the blurb too, really, for book 1. So
really just shatters him as a person. So he's rebuilding his personality as he goes along, and that means that he has to think a lot more deeply about a lot of stuff that was just second nature to him. And one of the things that I really wanted Triss to be able to do is Triss doesn't think like a human being, and every so often that will cause clashes, but it also gives me the opportunity for them to have these conversations where Errol's like, I'm not sure about the morality of killing this person. Triss is like, I don't know, killing is fine. I don't understand what your human problem is with this.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that back and forth between different morality structures allows me to bring out stuff that I wouldn't otherwise, especially given one of the, so, you always want to write challenges for yourself. You want to have stuff that's like, well, this will be more difficult. And one of the things that I said is, okay, I'm writing a book about a character who is basically a psychopath for the forces of good.
Yeah.
He's a killer, and he's good at his job, and he likes his job. And he's an addict. And one of the things that was important to me to keep it in the fantasy milieu was to say, I can't use any of the modern language of psychology or addiction. There are all of these shorthands that we have as a culture that I'm like, I'm just going to remove those tools from the table because they make a lot of this stuff too easy. And by removing those, I think I actually get a deeper look at some of them, because I have to talk about them in terms of their emotional impact and their impact on story in a different way. I can't say, oh, he's just a psychopath. I have to get into his head and why he's willing to kill people for the forces of good. And I think that was, it provided me with a crap ton of extra work, but I think it helps make the story deeper.
Oh yeah.
One other thing, because again, I know the world building was one of the things you were more interested in.
Yeah.
So I knew that there were going to be a number of books. So very early on in the first book, Errol's like, I'm going to go get a meal at this fish I've bought. Great. Been to a couple of those in coastal places, and Errol walks in, and he orders, and I'm like, okay, I need to give him something plausible to order that you don't want to. I'm going to have the Global Snarch, because that doesn't give your reader enough context. But you also don't want to say, I'm going to have the tuna, because that drops you into the world. So some kind of modifier for fish. And Errol orders, and he's about to pay, and I'm like, okay, I could at this point just put down an arbitrary amount of coinage to pay for this, but because this is a novel and because it's intended to be the first, at that point I had 6 books plotted out. I actually need to know how much things cost, and I need to know what my coinage is, all the denominations, how much they're worth, how much does a meal cost, how much does a cart cost. Magic is a thing in this world. I've got mage lanterns. those are going to be much more expensive than torches, but they last longer. So what's a reasonable cost? What's a reasonable cost point for that? Being able to magically alter items, change manufacturing and construction. And so I wandered away for about a week between ordering the food and paying for the food, and set out my coinage, thought about exchange rates with other local kingdoms, thought about what was expensive, what was made expensive, what was made cheap by magic, thought about, what are wages like, what's a price on somebody's head, and just set the whole thing. And I think that's one of the things that people tend to forget about world building, is so much of it is the iceberg, because that represented a week of work on my part. Well, I figured this all out. For the reader, it was 10 shillings, whatever the actual price was.
Yeah.
And I built it off of my monetary system is essentially renamed late Republican Roman coinage. But the city is architecturally probably 5th century Chinese, and the culture is probably much closer to 1st or 2nd century. And there's bits of Han China, and so those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the mechanical part of world building.
Yeah.
The organic part is the stuff that just brings into my head, and that's very easy for me. The late Jay Lake used to talk about the hand you're dealt theory of writing. So every writer gets a set of cards, and you get some face cards, you get some low cards, and for Jay, the easy cards were prose and plot, I think. And there were others that he had varying skills at when he really started working at it. World building is the easy one for me. My brain builds worlds at night. I wake up in the morning with complete fantasy worlds in my head. And sometimes they're useful and I write them down, and sometimes I'm just like, oh, that's actually kind of incoherent and isn't very useful. But so the baseline of world building happens almost subconsciously for me. But it's the tools you use to transform that into something really unique, I think, that are the important part of world building.
Yeah. Well, and I feel that, again, when I had lent my friend the copies of your books when I had finished, he asked me, he's like, well, what are these like? And I tried explaining to him, I'm like, that they're very unique. I said, if you, again, I talked about some of the books that he liked, some of these classic pulps or, the noir. And I had told him, I said, you got this Harry Dresden type assassin warrior. And I was like, his goddess has been killed and he's fractured by it and needs to find redemption. And he literally just stood there and looked at me. He goes, okay, I'm sold, and took all from me. And I was like, but I told him, I said, here's the thing. I said, you really got to read the first book though, like really soon. Because I just was trying to explain to him, I said, there's so much. I said, these books aren't very thick, but the world building is very deep. And I feel like that's what I really liked in particular. And there's so many circumstances that, pop into my head when I think about it. And I just think it's very hard to do. I think, I think most people need a Steven Erickson like, amount of pages to get the world building down. And I felt like you did it very, very quickly through conversations, through thoughts between the main characters, past stories, where Arl was telling us, different things that happen. He was even at times filling in Triss on a couple things. I really liked their different conversations. I thought that you had really deep relationships between all the characters. They each had some sort of trauma that they were dealing with. And, I thought that was very realistic for the situation, but also made them feel more real. But yeah, there's just I just felt like you did very subtle things with the world building that made the world feel very real. That's where I got done with the last book. And I was just like, okay, now what do I do? Because he had become one of my favorite characters that I had ever read. So I was really happy that you said you were trying to drum up some other ones. So I told my buddy and he was like, yes. So we're definitely looking forward to those. So
Awesome. Yeah, there will be 9. I could write some other stuff in the world, but the big arc is a 9-book arc.
awesome.
But Dresden Files, that was what I was trying to think of when I was talking about episodic.
Yeah, I don't know
story.
why I couldn't think of it either. I drum it up to this Sunday morning in a pandemic, year 5. So
Mhm. But yeah, I know you had mentioned being interested in some of the stuff that I read and some of the stuff that I recommend, and Dresden Files are one of those. The Mercedes Lackeys, the Harold Mage stuff was one of the. They're some of the books that made me. They're not everybody's cup of tea, but they were pretty popular. The stuff that Martha Wells has been doing lately is amazing.
yeah.
And I started with her with Element of Fire, which is to this day one of my go-to books. I will
Oh,
go
okay.
back.
See, I haven't read that one of hers yet. I'll have to go check that out.
Oh, it's fantastic. Element of Fire and Death of the Necromancer.
Okay.
Just outstanding books. Basically everything Roger Zelazny wrote, everything you see from me in terms of tone and dry humor and trying to get that essential extra element of weirdness into things. I probably learned most of that reading Zelazny.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm putting
and-
together a list for our readers online, and then for people that view that way, because some people just want to pop in for that. They told me, so I said that's
Yep.
fine too. So yeah, those are really good suggestions there.
Well, and if you go to my website, in the other stuff, there is a recommended reading list that I put together,
cool.
2005, 2006, and
Cool.
it's basically all of the science fiction and fantasy that really made me what I am.
Oh, that's cool. That's actually a really good idea for a web, author website too. I had not considered doing that, but Mark Timoney and I talked. He's actually been mentoring me a little bit through my edits and things for draft 2. But we had talked a lot about just different books and things in different chats. So that's actually a really good idea. I think I might do a small video and do my own. That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, no, it started out as the 100.
That's fair. I've been there. There's one night I just sat here and I just couldn't sleep, and I was like, I'm just gonna put together my top 25 of all time. And then I think that divulged into what I liked about those things. And then I think that's where really, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I think that's where really my newest idea for world building came. And all of a sudden, all these old things I had done. And I do want to mention too, where you said, that old book that you had, that you hadn't really done anything with. And a lot of people have mentioned that recently. So I was just trying to explain to some friends where, like, don't ever throw anything out. You never know when later on you'll have the skill to actually change it. And if the Fallen Blade series is an example of that, I think it's a really good example of why you don't throw those things away. Because a mutual friend of mine and Mark's actually, he goes, I just got mad and I deleted the whole book. And we're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm like, that could have been the next classic in 10 years. And I'm like, you just like gypped the whole community, and the whole world on what could have been a great story down the road. So that was one thing I was really trying to highlight is, you never know when that old work could be, your new novel. So.
Yeah, and for people who are interested in finding out about more about my stuff or follow me on Twitter, you can always go through kellymccullough.com.
Oh, I will put that link in. I do have your website up and ready to go. So I'll be putting that link in. And if you have any other links that you want people to go directly to, I'll put those in the description as well. That way it'd be very easy for them to find. I keep forgetting about WebMage, so I'll have to go and do that today. My buddy keeps asking me about it. So we're trying to read that as quickly as possible. I just feel like I've been really swamped lately and I have no brain left lately. But
well, teaching in this pandemic is a nightmare.
Yeah, it's been we were talking to I was talking to Miles Hurt. I just put up his interview the other day. I didn't realize he was a teacher in Australia, and he said the same thing. He's like trying to work on his second book, and he's like, I just have nothing left by the time I get home. So I'm trying to carve out 15 minutes each day just to get some sort of edits. But yeah, I didn't think it was going to be as bad as last year. It's been like 3 times as worse. So it's been really crazy, but figure if I could get everything done by the summer and take the summer off, kind of plan
Mhm.
ahead a little bit. But yeah, it's been very challenging. I feel for any authors that are teachers and trying to do it at the same time. 'Cause it's been, I mean, being an author is just hard, and writing a book's just hard in general, just for anybody. And I know I've probably been 14 years in the making for this first one. And yeah, it's been a long ride, but it's been fun, like you said earlier. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, just one more tiny touch on the old book, that I think most people, that first book comes from a place of deep love. It's the stuff that you love, and it's, if for no other reason, it's worth keeping that around to say, what is it about this that I love that I can use in what I'm doing now?
I think that's a really good point, actually. Yeah. And I said to somebody, I said, even if I don't, publish this first one, I said it, and that's what Mallory Kuhn said. She wrote six. So her first book that she published is her sixth novel. Um, and I remind people a lot too with Brandon Sanderson. He had written like something like 13 before finally going back and deciding to finish one of them and re-edit them and, do something very similar to what you had done with the Fallen Blade series, and then kind of went from there. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's nice to even just have them around. That's what we were trying to explain to our friend. It's nice just to have around, just to remind you why you do this whole crazy thing, because it is pretty crazy when you think about like the fact that you took, these ideas that you had in your head and then created a very real world for my friend and I, and these very real characters. Like I tried explaining to a couple students of mine the other day that really enjoy, reading and writing. And I said to him, I was like, it really is crazy when you think about it, that it's just up here and then you have these physical things, that come out. And,
Yep.
and the fact that somebody could cry about one of your characters, and I think it was your book 4. It was either it was book 4. That had to be one of the best endings to a book I have ever read. And it was so climactic. I went back home. I was at work on my lunch break and I could not wait. I went back home and I actually reread the last like 50 pages, and it was absolutely extraordinary. And that's when I first started bugging my friend about reading them. So it's just funny to me, again, to think that those ideas just came from your head one day and you just
Mhm.
put them on paper, and to make people feel real emotions for your characters, I think is truly rewarding. And it really is a very special thing, that authors do. So yeah. Again, Kelly, we really want to thank you. Like I said, I've been a fan ever since I picked up your books a couple years ago. My friend wanted me to say hello. His name is Dan too.
Hi, Dan.
Yeah, yeah. I always tease him, I'm Dan number 1. So we'll definitely be on the outlook. Like I said, I probably have to go and share a web page here and kindle it up together. Again, I want to thank you for coming on today, Kelly. Any other time you want to stop by, let us know, any of the news or anything,
Sure.
or any other novels, particularly Fallen Blade series, because I'm addicted. Want to thank everybody again for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. You can find this video and our other videos on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. I have not done the Spotify yet. It has been very difficult. I will try to get that up today. There's a couple things, licenses and things that we were finishing up for the RSS feed. I believe my tech guy said it is done by the time you guys will see this video, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. Feel free to reach us at scholarsofuma, that's UMA@gmail.com. Let us know, again, if you've read, Kelly's books, or if you're going to go and read them, let us know what you think. If you have any questions for, myself or him, I'd love to pass them on to him, or just, things that you liked. If you guys have any questions for future guests, please feel free to also send me an email, send us any videos or pictures that are fantasy or sci-fi related. Again, Kelly, really want to thank you for coming on. Really enjoyed picking your brain and fangirling out a little bit with you about the Fallen Blade series. I really look forward to talking to you on Twitter again, my friend.
Sounds good. You are most welcome, and thanks for having me on. And if you want me to come back sometime.
Oh, heck yeah.
Pleasure.
Heck yeah. As soon as I get my updated schedule, we'll get something on the books for like winter or spring, my friend.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Kelly, you have a good rest of the day, and I will talk to you later. Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Nice talking with you and your audience.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much, Kelly. I appreciate it.